So, in today's episode, I sit down with the incredible Allison Philbert. She is a leader who has transformed industries, shattered glass ceilings, and made waves in the tech world. We dive into her remarkable career. She had a rise to VP at 35, leading as the first female CEO of Digicel Jamaica. Along the way, we discuss everything: negotiating salaries, achieving financial freedom, and her latest passion project, a podcast celebrating resilience and determination. This conversation is packed with insights you do not want to miss. Allison Philbert, we're so happy to have you on the Guapify Podcast. Thank you so much for making time. I'm so excited to learn all about your career history, your upcoming aspirations. You are just like a powerhouse, a C-suite exec with 20 years in the game. I want to know all about your background before we dive into just more of who you are. You're an inspiration and a motivation to me. I know that our audience will feel the exact same way when they learn about just your incredible career trajectory as a Black woman, how you navigated spaces, how you've bossed up, navigated your salaries, your workspace. So tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, what makes you bomb. We're so excited to hear from you.
Oh, Kia, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Let's see. What do you need to know about Allison? I was born on the island of Jamaica. Grew up there. I had an amazing family unit. You know, my dad was a serial entrepreneur and my mom supported him. And like every West Indian household, there was no option other than to kind of go to school and get an education. My parents never went to college. And so that really started me on my journey, right? My dad was really focused on making sure that he was driving excellence in our household. And so winning was the name of the game. There really was, that was the standard that was set. And so that really put me on a path, I think, that moved me through life and career. And so I moved to the States to go to college. So DC is really my home away from home, even though I don't live there anymore. And I went in to do an engineering degree. And truth be told, I wanted to do aeronautical engineering because at the time, I liked the ratio of number of women to men. Of course, there were more guys, right? So the things you think about when you're growing up. But that wouldn't have taken me back to Jamaica. And that was one of the things that was really important to me was I wanted to be able to do something that at some point I'd be able to go back home. And so I went to school in DC. I went to the George Washington University, pursued a degree in computer engineering, and got a internship at what was Bell Atlantic at the time. And so that started me on my journey of going into telecommunications. I ended up in a role where my job was to break things and to really try and figure out how we could build and design the best product for our customers because we've put it through all of its paces. And I really enjoyed that. So that put me on my path. Now, interestingly, I don't know that I tell a lot of people this story, but at the end of my college experience, when I finished my undergrad, Bell Atlantic had offered me a job and I decided not to take it. And the reason I didn't take it was because I didn't see a path to progress for me. My manager was a white male who'd been in the business for almost 20 years. The team around me was all male, all white, which is to be expected in the industry, but I just didn't see a path to progress. So out of college, I went to a small French company and really enjoyed my experience there. And then full circle moment about a year later, they let us go because they were changing the direction of the business. And I ended up back at Bell Atlantic.
Wow, that's kind of wild. Wait, so we just gotta pause really quick. I love
Yeah.
that you said you identified that there wasn't a path to progress. Now, coming out of school, you're young, you're a Black woman, you're in a field that there are not a lot of counterparts who look and sound like you. How'd you find that confidence to say, I don't think this is the right opportunity? And I want to know a little more about after you got impacted by layoff, did it take a hit on your confidence? And how did you sort of bounce back from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, sometimes it's just a function of you're young and you don't know enough. I knew for me that it just wasn't the right fit, right? I was growing, I was learning a lot professionally, but I also knew that I was interested in moving up and moving through the business. There were more things that I wanted to do, and my management team wasn't going to be able to support me to do that because there wasn't anybody else in the business who looked like me. And so I think it's really important, especially for, one of the things I would tell my younger self is to listen to that gut, right? Your gut knows when an environment's not the right environment for you. And so I went in search of finding another opportunity that spoke to me, not only to my talents, but also surrounded me with the support that I needed. After the layoff, I would say that one of the things that I learned early in my career is the importance of networking. I wasn't the only person that was impacted. And so there were several people within the organization who had to move. One of them was a female manager who I had worked with. And she was going back over to Bell Atlantic in a division that was just starting up. So they were a startup within the larger business. And so she brought me on. And it felt different this time. So one of the things about very large companies is that they're cultures within cultures. And the team that I got brought on to, the president of that particular business unit was an Asian female. And so I came back into the company at a very different point with a different level of support with people who looked like me, and not necessarily in this case from a people of color, but certainly from a female perspective, right? So there were a lot more women leaders in the organization that I was moving into. And so that spoke to me. And so you fast forward, I go back to the company that I didn't want to work in, and I end up spending almost 20 years there.
Wow.
I grow up through this business. I made the executive ranks fairly young. I was probably about 30 when I made director and 35 when I made vice president. And
Wow.
I learned a lot in the business, right? I went in for 2 years and I stayed for almost 20. I did a lot of very different things for the company. And when I left, I was running one of their major markets in the Northeast, which was about $2 billion in revenue and about 4,000 people who reported to me. And we could talk stories about, kind of what was involved there. It was up in the New England area, in the Boston area, and I will tell you that there were not a lot of people who looked like us. So it
Wow.
made for very interesting days. Yeah.
Wow. So
Um,
we just got to pause as a millennial who is also navigating the career landscape. That is exceptional. 35 VP. I think that is a dream for many and for some overwhelmingly intimidating. And
yeah.
I'm curious, did you experience any imposter syndrome? Like, although you clearly had the smarts and the talent, you had the finesse, but that is nerve-wracking to have all of that revenue that you're responsible for, 4,000 direct reports. How do you navigate imposter syndrome? Because even for the most expert, the most
Yeah.
talented person, I'm sure that it creeps up, and especially being a Black female in these white dominated spaces. Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, listen, I think we all struggle with some level of imposter syndrome. And I don't like to call it imposter syndrome, right? I think when you name something, you give it more power than it actually has. What you really have to think about, and this happened to me even recently, I was asked to come in and coach some executives at a fairly large consulting company, one of the big fours. And when I looked at the resume of the other executives that were going to be my peer group, I thought to myself, what am I doing here? Right. Even after all of my years of experience. And my mom reminded me, she said, hey, listen, they asked for you. You didn't ask to be here. So you have to have a mindset of belonging and a mindset that says, I am able to do this, right? Do you know everything? No, absolutely not. But that's par for the course. I think, the fact that I have always been curious and interested in learning has really propelled me through my career. And I keep that curiosity with me all the time. But most importantly, I've got to remember that I'm a badass too, right? And so I
Yes.
deserve to be in the room. And as soon as you own that little voice in the side of your ear, it will go away. You just have to keep doing it. You got to get the reps in. And the more you do it, the better you get at it.
I deserve to be in the room. Like I belong here. They wanted me. I love that. That's a mantra. That's an affirmation. All right, so we got to keep it real because if you are a VP by 35, you absolutely were making bank. You were with the
Yeah.
company for 20 years. So talk to us about career, salary, negotiation.
Yeah.
Like, how do you navigate all of that, especially when you're moving up very quickly? How do you
Yeah.
ask for what you deserve? How do you know what you deserve? Like, are you asking your peers? Are you just doing a comp analysis on your
Yeah.
own? Are you imagining like what you think you want? And also talk to us about how your life changed when you did earn the income that you desired.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when I got out of college, I just took whoever had the highest offer, right? It was like, oh, $52,000 fresh out of college. When you've got friends who are in like, who are non-science or doing English and they're getting like 30,000, you're like, and I'm making a ton of money. So early in my career, I was very focused on kind of what the bottom line was. Fortunately, I ended up working for a company that also had great benefits because you have to look at the total package. You can't just look at the salary, right? As I moved up in career, yeah, absolutely. It definitely became much more lucrative. And so it was all the things. I at that point understood that depending on the market that you were in, I moved up and down the Northeast. I was in DC when I first started working. Then I was in the New York, New Jersey region. Then I moved to the New England area. The market ranges are different. So I did my own independent assessment of what that looked like. I had friends in HR. HR people are your friends, right? So they could help me understand comps. I also would advocate and talk to individuals who were in those roles, right? This notion of salary being a taboo discussion is something of the past. There is no reason for us to not have discussions to understand what is happening in the overall marketplace. And so understanding with all of that information what the ranges were, I was able to command and demand kind of the salary that I expected. My most recent executive role when I was a CEO of Digicel in Jamaica, because I did end up going back home, right? Walking in because I spent so much time focusing on the value that I had, it was understood that I wasn't going to take any less than my predecessor who had been in the role before. And so going into that negotiation was much easier because they knew that I had a good sense of kind of what their salary was. And so, I needed to be able to get at least that much or more. And by the way, that was a male counterpart.
Wow. So you had insight, you had your network, you had HR. Now you did say you went back home to Jamaica to run, was it Digicel?
Yeah, so Digicel is the largest mobile operator on the island of Jamaica. And if you remember at the beginning, I said that, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to move back there. And so if I parlay into your last question, right, what did making bank, what did making dough do for me? What it did, most importantly, was it gave me flexibility. So I left Verizon when I was 40. I was a vice president of a fairly large market. At that time, I was married, so I now have my husband and two young kids, and it was important for us to move back home. And so we made a choice, right? There was a choice about continuing to kind of move up in this career ladder because I was young and I had a lot of runway, or do something that was really important to us, and that was to move back to the region and expose our children to living in the Caribbean. And so we chose to do that. So the first thing people need to understand is having, making good money allows for you to be super flexible and make those kinds of choices. And so, yeah, I ended up moving back to Jamaica in 2017 and becoming actually the first woman to lead the largest mobile operator on the island.
Wow, that is goals on goals. Like, who would not want to have the financial freedom, but then the opportunity to give back in a way that's so meaningful? And you really were able to honor like your first request, which was to come back home and to have a real impact. So that's really incredible. Would you consider yourself financially free? Do you feel like you've obtained financial freedom and even may have put your kids in a place where they'll have generational wealth and their children?
Yeah, listen, I am still on that journey, right? I think one of the things that we need to do as Black people is to really focus on financial literacy at an early age. And so we've had our own fair share of mistakes, right? Just kind of learning through the overall process. My dad, even though he was successful as an entrepreneur, he passed away several years ago. He didn't put all the pieces in place for us to maintain our financial freedom. And so we had to manage through some of those things. And so I'm still on that path. I'm still on that journey. My husband's an entrepreneur. And my advice to people who are looking to have financial freedom and wellness is first start early, right? Second, keep your day job, but also look at investing in opportunities that provide you with passive income. Look at areas that are going to grow, whether that's in real estate. So real estate is one of those portfolios that has worked really well for us, right? So investing in property that's going to grow over time, using that as some additional sources of income, whether you're doing that as a rental property or an Airbnb property, those kinds of things will grow over time. You've got to be in it for the long haul. Diversify into options, whether you're going to invest in the stock market or in bonds, depending on what your risk appetite is. So you really have to diversify and continue to grow. But the sooner you start, there is this wonderful concept called compound interest. It is a beautiful thing, right? So the earlier you start investing in your financial wellness and financial literacy, it will serve you a long, long way. So still on that journey is a short answer, but having been exposed to, having a salary at a very early age that created a lot of flexibility for me, I have a greater appreciation for what it means for my kids and
That's
my
really,
family.
really good. That's so honest. And I'm actually curious. So when you went back home and you're this phenomenal leader, was there any pressure? Because I've heard from a lot of women in particular who are successful and high income earners that their families tend to pull on them a bit, or there's this expectation for them to support everyone. So you going back home to Jamaica and being so successful and having this financial freedom and flexibility,
Yeah.
is there any pressure to support the family, support those closest to you? What did that look like?
I have a small immediate family unit, and so I would say, I didn't have to do more than I really wanted to. I'm very, very blessed. My husband is super self-motivated, so we could have a whole conversation about, Black men, Black women, and Black women who earn more than Black men. Fortunately, my partner is very confident in what he does, and so he doesn't put any pressure on me financially. And then, my sister is accomplished in her own way, right? She went to veterinary school, so she has her own veterinary business. And my mom is, she's retired, and you got to take care of mom.
Of course, of course. Okay. So
Uh,
mom was
so
nestled in there.
yeah, so mom, of course, is nestled in there, but fortunately not the case. I was really more focused around, how do we continue to educate others? There's a balance, right? There's a balance between supporting people, and enabling people. And so I try to take the role of a support role where I can. And I've needed support in my own life and experience versus enabling people. I think the enabling people is where financially people go down the wrong path. You got to learn to say no.
Oh, that's so good. I hope everyone listening had heard that very clearly. Enabling and supporting, there is a fine line, and taking that pressure off and being able to say no. So that way you can save up your coins and keep that investment going. Because I know we all want to give back, but I think
Yeah.
it can give us, put us in territory where we're now in a deficit trying to be the savior to everyone. So this is really insightful. Now that you are successful and accomplished and you've gone back home and you're doing all the things and you have a
Yeah.
wealth of knowledge, I'm sure there's some passion projects. You and I were talking about your podcast that you're working on, and I want to
Yeah.
like dive in to just the concept, the inspiration behind it. Can you just share a little bit about where you are in the podcast development, what the podcast will be centered about, how we even got to this place in your life where you desire to create a podcast?
Yeah, so just for context, so everybody has a little bit more background, right? I spent over 20 years in corporate. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I decided that I wanted to pivot. One of the things that I realized in my corporate career was that while it was great to be at the table as a senior leader in an organization, it was even more important for me to figure out how we could make a difference in getting more of us at the table. So, one of the first things that I did and realized that I wanted to do was to move from being on the executive side of the business, kind of running a team, to being on the board side of the business. So, I made a transition about 3 years ago to focus on trying to get onto more board roles. And so what that means is the board of many companies is really where the strategy is set, right? Where the tone is set around who we hire, what are we going to focus on, how do we make our money? And given the experience that I had, I wanted to be able to bring my own diverse perspective. And so that was one of the first points at which I decided to really step out of corporate in the role that I had been in previously. Secondly, one of the things that was super important to me throughout all of the roles that I've had the benefit of working with very large brands who are very focused on community and customer and people, right? So people are super important to me, and I'm really interested in making sure that equity is something that is achievable for us, especially for those of us who are underserved and who are less privileged. And so, from a technology perspective, I focused a lot on making sure that there was digital equity and digital access on the technology side, and then had the opportunity to work with some companies that created financial access, right? So think things like mobile wallets and working with them to make sure that people who were underbanked had access to cash and capital. So if I think about how all of those things come full circle and realizing that I wanted to see how I could spend more time using my knowledge set and resources to make a difference, I found that for me, one of the things that was really helpful was my mentorship and relationships with others. And so, you can't ever go on this journey by yourself. You can, but you don't get very far. Right. And I think, you get further when you are working together. And so there are so many people that have inspirational voices and inspirational stories that need to be heard. And in this era of the TikToks and the IGs, everybody tends to see kind of the shiny, glossy, life is all good.
Yes.
And it takes a lot to get right. And so it takes a lot to get there, right? I mean, I'm accomplished in my own right, but I've had to go through struggles. And so the concept around the podcast is really to talk about, especially for Black people, right? Not that we can't learn from a larger audience, but especially for Black people, what it takes for us to get there, right? These are going to be stories of resilience, of courage, of the mindset that it takes to be successful. And so I'm excited. We're still kind of working through all of the details, but I'm super excited to have some conversations with people across sectors and industries. I've got people kind of telling personal stories around the choices that they've had to make as women, and choosing between family and career, or those individuals who were born with diseases that impact us as a community, like sickle cell. And how do you take that and then end up living a life well lived, kind of beating the odds? So it's going to be super inspirational. There'll be stories of entrepreneurs who kind of go through this messy middle. People think entrepreneurship is sexy. It is not, girl.
Oh
It
my
takes
gosh,
a lot of
say it
work.
again.
It takes a lot of energy. And there's so many days when you feel like you're in it alone. And so being able to share the stories of these entrepreneurs or executives who are trying to navigate, all of the valleys just to get to the peaks is really, really, really what this is going to be focused on.
So that sounds so inspiring. I cannot wait to hear just all of the many stories. And I know that you're working on the pilot episode and the guest will be your cousin. Can you just give us a little forecast, a little taste of what that
Yeah.
episode will cover?
Yeah, sure. So I won't call any names because we want to kind of make a big announcement. But, our pilot episode is focused on a former Olympic athlete who this is a female athlete, and she has had to make some choices in her life. She really has had to make a choice between her personal aspirations to start a family and balance that against a sport that requires, of course, that you have to be at your peak performance, right? And so we've seen all of these stories, especially now where we're trying to change the norm around female athletes and whether or not they can become moms and continue to pursue their athletic career. And so this first episode is focused on her journey, a choice that she had to make early in her career around having a child versus continuing to stay relevant in her sport. And then as she grew her family, supporting her family, and what happened with her motherhood journey. And more importantly, or equally as important, this pivot that she has made because now she is no longer in the sport. She's aged out, as you would expect, and how she's transitioning, right? This transitioning from one career path into another on her journey and how she's growing through that and the mindset it's taken for her to get there. So I'm super excited. We expect that that will come out somewhere early next year. So we're looking forward to it.
Okay, 2025, we're going to have a really powerful pilot episode. I know that will resonate with so many, especially myself as a working mom of two. There's always so much decision making. While I may not be an athlete, I feel like an athlete in my own right. So I'm definitely looking
Yeah.
forward to hearing her story told so thoughtfully and just the inspiration that will come from that. So, Allison, you are absolutely a powerhouse. There is no
Thank
confusion to
you.
how you got where you are, and I'm just so excited to see what you'll do next. I definitely want to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions on Guapify. Whenever we have a guest, we get to the rapid fire, and you actually picked out a couple of good ones. You picked my favorite, so these will be really fun. First up is a splurge that you will never regret.
Yeah. I decided when I left my first big corporate role, when I left Verizon, that I was going to go halfway across the world and make my first trip to Africa. And so I went to Zanzibar for 10 days with people I didn't know, but it was a Black travel group and I loved it. Best investment I ever made.
Wow. Okay. I don't know who's going to top that. That's pretty dope. I love that. Okay. So if you could give one financial tip to your younger self, what would it be?
Getting, understanding financial literacy sooner. And I do that now with my kids. So my kids now are 11 and 12, and we spend a lot of time with them talking about, what's credit? How do you grow a credit? What are investments? And so I would definitely say being financially literate much earlier in life.
That is a core value of mine. So we are in alignment. And speaking of what's credit, what's investment, cash or credit card?
Credit card. I think for me, people give credit cards a bad rap. It really is about understanding it, but there's so much value in knowing how to use a credit card and using it properly. There are a ton of people who make money in this world, and believe me, they know how to use credit.
Oh, we're on the same page, which very nicely goes into travel points or a cashback rewards credit card.
Travel points all day long. I love to travel. That's one of the things I love to do. I love to get exposed to new places and meet new people and eat new foods. And so travel all the time.
Okay, that's fair. I love it. I'm torn between cashback and travel, but that makes total sense. All right, last one, self-care splurge. Is it a spa day or a staycation or something totally different?
Oh my God, it has to be spa day. Like I love to be pampered. Take me out, give me the mani, the pedi, the massage, all the things. When you work hard, it's important for you to take care of yourself. It's probably one of the other really big lessons that I've learned. You got to take care of yourself first before you think about taking care of others. And so take me to the spa.
I love that. The soft life, you absolutely deserve it. You've worked hard. You make it look easy. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. You truly are an inspiration and a motivation. We're so excited about your upcoming podcast. We cannot wait to hear it. Where can people find you? Where can we learn more about you? How do we get connected with you?
Yeah, so I have actually been kind of low key on the social media world. If you want to connect with me professionally, I am on LinkedIn. I'm Allison Philbert on LinkedIn. And, there's more to come. I look forward to giving you guys an update once this podcast launch. And that is where you're going to see a lot more of me and hear a lot more about these stories that I think are going to be super impactful for others.
Thank you so much, Allison.